The Las Vegas Raiders just received terrible news before NFL roster cuts. Reminder, you got to get down to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern time today. And coming up here on today's show, I'm going to tell you why the news that the Raiders received is terrible. Today's show is presented by Panda Sups. I'm Mitchell Renz, host of the Raiders Report, and don't get me wrong, I'm excited to see how this Raiders roster looks because the amount of 53-man roster shows that I have done, I know how difficult of a job it's going to be for Antonion Pierce, how difficult of a job it's going to be for Tom Pelissero. There's going to be a lot of players out there that get to live their dream, and which is one of the reasons why from this show, I feel like somebody that deserves to live their dream is probably going to have that taken away. Now, if anybody out there wants to get hooked up here with Panda Sups, use code Raiders for 25% off at pandasups.com. The terrible news comes in from Tom Pelissero. It says, important note, as teams construct their initial 53-man rosters, NFL teams were informed that the NFLPA vetoed the revised emergency third quarterback rule that would have allowed teams to elevate a bona fide QB from the practice squad unlimited number of times. So the rule is now reverted to the 2023 version, which says that the emergency third quarterback must be on the 53-man roster, not an elevation. Allowing teams to elevate the third quarterback each week would have amounted to a sort of legal stashing, which the union doesn't want. So long story short, my original 53-man roster video that I did, I had the Raiders keeping just Aidan and Gardner Minshew because I was like, oh, well, we're going to be able to elevate either Nathan Peterman, either Carter Bradley. So when you look at this new rule now, the Raiders are going to have to keep a player that I actually don't know if they wanted to keep, and that's going to be either Peterman, it's going to be either Carter Bradley more than likely, which then takes away somebody's job, potentially a Amari Gainer, potentially a Tyreek McAllister. So like when the NFL did this rule, I'm a little bit saddened by it. The other reason, though, why they did it is because think about how much money quarterbacks make. All NFL teams would know, well, I don't have to pay a third quarterback what they would usually make if they're on my roster. I can just put them on the practice squad, save a little bit of money. I get from both sides of it, but not every team is in the same situation the Raiders are. So getting this news for Las Vegas is terrible news. So you receive the terrible news. What are you going to do? You're just going to crawl up into a ball? You're going to lay down here and you're just going to go to sleep? No, that's not what Antonion Pierce does. Now you got to create a plan, and now you got to figure out what you're going to do. So now you got to figure out who your quarterback 3 is because you're probably going to have to keep one of those guys on your roster. Are you going to keep Carter Bradley? Are you going to keep Nathan Peterman? We know that Gardner Minshew's the quarterback 1 as it stands right now. Obviously, that can change. Aidan O'Connell's a reliable quarterback 2, but we got to get one thing straight here. There's not going to be a world where Carter Bradley walks out onto that football field and starts at any moment. There's not going to be a moment where Nathan Peterman is the starting quarterback. This job is for quarterback 3 and quarterback 3 only. So who ends up winning it? You're going to have to make a decision today, AP. Maybe you watch today's show, you get some answers from Raider Nation, and we're able to help you out because, quite frankly, this is a tough decision. I can make an argument why I would keep each one of these guys, and I think realistically, what you've seen for Carter Bradley, what you've seen from Nathan Peterman, let me know down below who wins this quarterback 3 job. Type CB for Bradley, type NP for Nathan Peterman. My mind is telling me Peterman, but my heart, but my body is saying Carter Bradley. And the reason why that I say that is because if I was running the Las Vegas Raiders, it depends on what you want from that quarterback 3 spot. If it was up to me based on what I would want to keep Nathan Peterman, and I'd want to keep Peterman because he's got 2 years of experience in Luke Getsy's offense with Chicago. He's a smart veteran quarterback. I'll admit, sometimes the play of what you've seen on the field, it's not there. But when a QB like Peterman, when a quarterback like Brian Hoyer can stick around in the NFL for as long as they can, Aidan O'Connell's going to be in the NFL for a long time. Why? They're smart up here. They can pick up a playbook, and they can execute the offense. I would want my QB3 to be able to execute the offense in practice because that's where the real value is. I'm not planning on putting Nathan Peterman in the game. That's never going to happen. If you wanted to keep Carter Bradley, it's because that you actually are okay with the idea of trying to develop him and that he has more upside than Peterman. Does he have more upside than Peterman? Probably he does, just simply because we haven't seen it yet. We've seen Nathan Peterman. I know exactly what Peterman is. Carter Bradley, there is that, well, maybe he could be a good backup in the NFL. The reason, though, why I want the Raiders to keep Peterman And it's not a knock on Bradley. It's if the Raiders are going to spend some of that extra time to be able to help develop a quarterback that isn't your starting quarterback in Gardner Minshew, I want them to invest that time in Aidan O'Connell. Because is what Carter Bradley looked like, Aidan is light years of a better quarterback. He is light years of a guy that's I would be willing to trust right now. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, I thought you hated Aidan. I don't hate Aidan O'Connell, but that's the quarterback that I would rather develop than Carter Bradley. When you compare their preseason numbers from this season, okay, preseason numbers this year, Nathan Peterman was 12-19 for 108 yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions, and a quarterback rating of 95.9. Carter Bradley, on the other hand, had a 50% completion percentage, 169 yards, a touchdown, a pick, that quarterback rating of 68.9. But one thing that you saw Antonion Pierce do was gain trust. And he gained trust in Bradley where he ran the ball 9 straight times in that first preseason game. Then the second game, lets him sling it around a little bit. But I also am going to take a page out of what AP did before, where AP started Gardner Minshew in that second game. He started Nathan Peterman in that third game. And I think that was one of the ways of AP telling you, hey, you know what? Peterman, it's his job right now. And I think Peterman's going to be the guy they end up keeping. But you could go another option. Like, maybe it's not the terrible, terrible, terrible news that I originally thought. Maybe the Raiders want to get a little bit ballsy. And quite frankly, I don't mind this idea because I would be happy if the Raiders kept Carter Bradley. I would be happy if the Raiders kept Nathan Peterman. And if they wanted to move on from either guy, I'm going to be honest, I would not care. If you're in that boat where you're like, I don't care who the quarterback 3 is, here's the other option. You keep only 2 quarterbacks on your roster, and then you claim somebody or go out and sign a free agent. The number one player that I would do that, and again, sorry Carter Bradley, sorry Nathan Peterman, I think Dorian Thompson Robinson gets cut today. They have a lot of other quarterbacks on that roster. They have Deshaun Watson. They have Tyler Huntley. They have Jameis Winston. Dorian Thompson Robinson is not a QB4 in any NFL roster. He lives in Las Vegas. He has some connections with some of these players. And when he gets released today, if he gets released today, that's a player that I'm going to go on the waiver wire. That's a guy that I'm going to try to claim, and that would be my quarterback 3. But guess what? This is a show that I did last week, and I said, Raider Nation, we have a problem. The problem is there's some uncertainty at the quarterback spot. That's just me being honest with you. That's you being honest with yourself. There is some uncertainty with Gardner Minshew and Aidan O'Connell. I also said that I wouldn't want to go out and sign Ryan Tannehill because it's going to cost you more than Minshew. If you want to see some other QBs where, remember last week everyone was like, Mitch, the Raiders should go get Trey Lance. I said, no, they shouldn't. 5 interceptions later. Trey Lance is Trey Lance. If you want to see some other quarterbacks that at least have a shot to be cut or QBs that I would be entertaining the idea of going out and trading for, here's this video. It's down in the comments. It's in the description, but it's a reason why you subscribe to the Raiders Report. Let's go to the next thing here. If I'm the Raiders, I make a can't cut list, a list of players that are right on that roster bubble, players that I'm going like, all right, that guy, he could make the team. Well, you know what? That player, he could make the team too. He did some good things. So I'm making a can't-cut list on offense and on defense where I'm putting together 10 roster bubble candidates. I'm putting together 10 roster bubble candidates on that offensive side of the football. And I would say right now the 10 players that are right there on that cusp. You know what I mean? I feel like it's March Madness and bubbles are getting popped here. These are the 10 players that I have saying they are really, really close to making this squad. A lot of wide receivers, which I think it's just because that's how open that battle is. Everybody that is not named DJ Turner, Trey Tucker, Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams has a shot to make this team. Then your offensive linemen, Jordan Meredith, Ben Brown, Jalen McKenzie, Dalton Wagner. They've been battling out on that offensive line. To me, though, there are 3 players on this list that you can't cut. And they are Christian Wilkerson, due to the fact of him still being able to be a reliable receiver. To me, he was the guy that showed, you know what, if God forbid, if an injury were to happen, he's somebody that I can trust, especially in practice. Tyreek McAllister, hell of an athlete, does a lot on special teams, was one of the best special teams players in the UFL last season. Showed you he's got the burst, has that legit 4.3 speed, and then Jordan Meredith. Jordan Meredith had himself one hell of a preseason. He had himself one hell of a preseason, that's probably the best way I can put it. He was one of the highest graded PFF players out there, showed you that he's a really solid pass blocker, and maybe he's figuring out this James Craig system a little bit more. I wrote off Greg Van Roten last season, but when you turn on the tape, Jordan Meredith has been consistent, and with all the injuries we've had on that offensive line, I think that you need to get a little bit more consistency. Again, I'm not saying he's a starter. I think he's just somebody that you put there as a backup because they're going to keep Colton Miller, Cody Whitehair, Andre James, Dylan Parham, Thayer Munford. But I'll also say this. If I could say one surprise cut candidate from today that I don't know if I would have envisioned, it's Andres Pete. Based off of some reports, based off of some things that I have heard, Andres Pete is not a lock to make this team either. Jalen McKenzie is a sleepy name to keep in mind for the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, before we get into the defensive side of the football and we start looking at some guys on that defense, reminder, this is a tough decision. There's a lot of people that are going to be losing jobs today. There's still going to be a lot of players that we're going to try to bring back on the practice squad. I'm going to do everything I can to keep you guys up to date, but today's a day that I do not like. And that's me being honest. I don't like today, but I do like it because there are a lot of other players out there that do finally get to be like, all the hard work I did is worth it. And I think you're going to see a lot of that on the defensive side of the football. So here are 10 players that I think are on that bubble. And they are right there from top to bottom. And there's going to be one player who I put on my 53-man roster video, which I did over the weekend, that you're not going to see in green here. And it's because I could see the Raiders keeping that extra quarterback. So who is it? The player that I originally did not, or that I had making it that didn't make it is Jaden Grant. The players that you got to keep to me. You got to keep Matthew Butler because of the depth. You got to keep Amari Gaynor. You're going to have to keep Charles Snowden because I think you got to kick Tyree Wilson in on the inside. And Janarius Robinson right now is better than Tyree Wilson. He is your fourth best defensive end, and quite frankly, I think he showed a lot. But not being able to keep Jaden Grant to me, not being able to keep Chris Smith, where like if you were able to go back and say, okay, I only have to keep two quarterbacks, then one of those guys has the opportunity to make this squad. Because the Raiders now potentially might have to keep an extra QB, maybe they don't. Maybe they say, you know what, Mitch, I'm okay with not having Peterman, not having Carter Bradley. I'll go out and I'll find another QB on the waiver wire on Wednesday. I'm okay with that idea. But if your expectation was to come in today and say, hey, man, I got to go out there and I got to be able to put a roster together and I need to be able to do X, Y, Z, your plans had to change. So because of the new rules, the plans absolutely positively did have to change here a little bit. Now, again, y'all, coming up here, I wanted to talk about what this rule and who it hurts the most. Now, Pelissero, again, talked about the initial 53-man roster, how we were hoping to be able to have that third emergency quarterback, but due to the new rules, that's not going to be the case. So to me, this really hurts a handful of players the most where, you know, we always talk about winners and losers and certain guys that are right there on that bubble. Certain players that are super close to being able to figure out a way to make this squad. And I think that these 6 players here are the ones that it does hurt the most. And I wanted all 6 of these guys to be able to figure out a way to make the roster, but that's just simply not going to happen. Jaden Grant, Chris Smith, Amari Gaynor, Tyreek McAllister, Byron Young, Charles Snowden. Every time I do my final 53-man roster, I always get it down to 5-6 players that I'm like, all right, Mitch, how can I make an argument of why that guy deserves to make a team? How can I make an argument of why that guy deserves to make a team? And it's been tough. And I think Tyreek, I think Charles Snowden, Amari Gaynor, out of that list of players is going to be the list of names that I end up keeping. Before we get into the very final part of today's show, again, huge shout out to our sponsor, Panda Subs. I've been crushing, and I mean crushing, the Campfire S'mores protein. I personally love it with milk. It's also right now on a deal for you guys. You can get it 25% off, code Raiders at pandasups.com. If anybody has any questions about the protein, please don't be afraid to ask me. But I mean, I'm looking at the ingredients right now. 1 scoop of protein, 160 calories, total fat 2 grams. I mean, even people are like, well, what are the carbohydrates on that, Mitch? 6 grams of carbs, 3 grams of total sugar. And I'm going to be the honest guy. Like, I don't want to say I'm a total gym head because I'm totally not. But if I see something that's got 30 grams of protein and tastes as good as this stuff, that's really what I look for. I'm not going to try to get into all the other ins and outs of it. I will also say that I love this protein as like a good, meal replacement, where sometimes if I have like whey protein and I have that right after workout, I'm hungry again and probably just like a few hours. If I have this during lunchtime, I'm good for a few hours. It's going to hold me off a little bit. So it's got whey, casein, protein, also some collagen. If you haven't noticed, I've been trying to grow out my hair. It's been helping there. So pandasups.com, code Raiders for 25% off. The final thing that I think that the Raiders would have to do with these new terrible rules, or terrible news that they got is you're going to make an IR list. And the reason why I would make an IR list is because there's going to be certain players that you want to keep on the 53-man that you're going to have to designate maybe potentially as an IR stash candidate. So, like, what do I mean exactly? The Raiders, to me, one player that I think that they're no doubt going to put on the short-term IR is free safety 7th-round pick Trey Taylor. Now, if you don't put him on the 53-man roster, then you can't put him on the IR, okay? So for the Raiders, I think what they're going to do is they're going to say, all right, Trey Taylor, you're going to be on the IR. Tommy Eichenberg, I think that there's a chance that he goes on the IR. And Amari Burney, there's a chance that maybe he goes on the IR. But then that also opens up a few other spots for some of these players where we're sitting here going, all right, they just got waived. If I'm the Raiders, I'm going, hey, this is our plan. We're going to keep Trey Taylor on the 53, and then we're going to place him on the IR, and then we're going to be able to bring you back. Like, those conversations do happen. But out of these 5 players here, I'm keeping Tyree on the 53. There were some people that were like, oh, Mitch, he's hurt. He's not hurt. He's fine. He just didn't play in that preseason game. Brandon Faison, I'm cutting him. I'm going to save $2.6 million. Eichenberg, you're going to keep him on the 53. He's not somebody that I think is banged up enough to be put on that. But for a Trey Taylor and Amari Burney, I'm putting those 2 guys on the IR. That allows you to see a little bit more potentially out of a Jaden Grant. Lets you see a little bit more, just in case, out of Amari Gainer. And it just helps you figure out a way, like, can I keep a Tyreek McAllister? Can I keep an extra player that I don't know if I would have originally kept? This is what I would do right now based off the plan of the Raiders receiving the news that you are going to have to keep 3 QBs. You're not going to be able to just elevate one off the practice squad. Before I get on here, Field Yates had a really interesting tweet today based on some of the rules that have been going down here around the NFL. And I just want you guys to just read through this, where a player with 4 or more years of service is vested veteran and thus is outright released. So a lot of times when I say waived, it's a player that's got less than 4 years. So if I say, which yesterday, a lot of the Raiders players were waived, all the Raiders players yesterday were waived, they have less than 4 years. Only a player that is outright released, cut, has got 4 or more years, they can sign anywhere. If a player hits waivers, they're going to be subject to be claimed on Wednesday. So Field also had this one to say. Teams can be reduced their roster by keeping players on the PUP list. That's kind of what I was just talking about there with, Tommy Eichenberg, Amari Burney. They're not going to be eligible to return until week 5. So you're out for 4 weeks when you do that. But I think that that's an okay thing to do when you have so many players that are right here on this roster bubble. Players like an Amari Burney, a Tommy Eichenberg that you're not going to move on from, but you want to see some more from a few UDFAs. Teams will also be placing players on injury reserve this year. A new rule is in place. Teams may designate up to 2 players to be placed on IR. So that's why when you go back and you look at that, I put 2 of those players on IR as eligible to return after 4 games missed. So again, 2 players that I would put on there, Trey Taylor, and then I would also put Amari Burney. Then on Wednesday, this is the whole waiver wire process and how teams can claim guys. You got to think of it as almost like the draft. The league will process waiver claims submitted on any player, that was placed on waivers. The priority waiver claim order matches the original 2024 NFL draft. So for those that don't remember, the Raiders, they're at number 13 in this claim process. The waiver is a useful tool to mine for young developmental talent. Looking at the wire right now, there's a lot of good cornerbacks that I think are available. There's some interesting defensive tackles, and I'll probably make a video on Wednesday of some of the guys that I would at least target and pick up the phone and give a call to. But there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens today. There's going to be a lot of stuff that happens tomorrow. The plan is for Chugs and I to still go live at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Pacific. We might go live earlier. We might go live later. Just depends when the Raiders officially announce that roster. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure the noties are turned on because today's going to be a wild day around the nation.